LaNorris Sellers is a special player who has put together a special season at South Carolina this year. The Gamecocks are a completely different team when Sellers is playing versus when he is not. Had Sellers not gotten hurt against LSU, the Gamecocks may even have been a lock for the college football playoff rather than sitting on the outside looking in. This is the story of LaNorris Sellers, a future Heisman Trophy contender. But before we get into this, if you enjoy college football content like this, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. Also, let me know who your favorite quarterback is in college football in the comment section below. LaNorris Sellers was born on June 23, 2005, and grew up in Florence, South Carolina, which is just a little over an hour east of Columbia. Growing up, Sellers was always the most athletic kid in school, which separated him from the other young football prospects. His high school coach told the Greenville News, "Everyone always looked up to him, even guys older or guys his age, just because of his athletic ability, so he was thrusted into being a leader from a very young age." Sellers always led by example and supported those around him, being described as an old soul back in high school. His personality is deeply rooted in football, with a sprinkle of eccentricness. LaNorris Sellers explained, "He eats lemons whole, the peel and everything." When LaNorris was 11 years old, he would write a letter to Cam Newton, the man he idolized as a child, constantly watching Newton film and studying Newton throughout. He would address the letter with Newton's name, expecting that to be enough to make it to Cam. Sellers' parents made a home that comforted feelings and left the door open for conversation. They never wanted their son's head to feel too heavy, where he couldn't focus on the task at hand, so they encouraged him to get his emotions out. His mom said if there was an issue, Sellers sought advice and worked through it without putting others down in the process. Sellers attended South Florence High School, where he had become the starting quarterback his freshman year. Throughout high school, he was always a quiet player, with his coaches sometimes wishing he was more vocal. But that was not the Sellers process. He was a lead by example guy, not a screaming and yelling guy. Sellers would start every high school game his freshman and sophomore year, and was on track to do the same his junior season. In a win over North Myrtle Beach High School during his junior year though, Sellers ran a read option. He faked a pitch out to the running back, trying to instead rev up the engines and turn the corner. Just in front of him, a lineman fell, and Sellers had to step on the brakes. He was tackled from the side, falling onto his shoulder. As he hit the ground, a pair of defensive linemen fell on him, compressing Sellers' chest. Sellers couldn't lift his arm after the play. The athletic trainers thought it might have been a shoulder injury at first, most likely the collarbone. His mom wanted him to take some Motrin to help with the pain, but he refused. Sellers has watched too many documentaries about football players getting addicted to drugs that he steers clear of any pain medicine. Finally, he grabbed the Motrin, split it in half, put one half in his mouth, and chucked the other half on the ground. His family knew it was a serious injury, and he would take him to get x-rays the next day. The news they would get was that the injury was worse than they originally thought. Sellers had dislocated a bone in his chest. The biggest issue was the bone had shifted 3 inches to the right and was laying on his heart, sitting around all of his major blood vessels. LaNorris was unable to sit still, but one wrong movement could have led to him puncturing his heart or bursting a blood vessel. The doctors in Florence wouldn't touch LaNorris, as it was too risky, so they would instead take the 90-minute drive to Columbia, where doctors could perform the surgery to fix the issue. The doctors did a CT scan on Saturday night. Then they did one on Sunday morning. In between, his mother sat awake in the hospital, worried about her son. When the Sellers family was finally readying for the surgery, a doctor greeted them with a bizarre smirk on his face. He pulled up the CT scans from the Sunday morning. It made no sense. The bone laying over Sellers' heart, the one that shifted 3 inches to the right, had somehow shifted 3 inches back to the left. All the doc had to do was grab Sellers' left arm, rotate it up, forward, and back. No surgery was required, and the family went home the next day. Sellers would put up big numbers as a senior, throwing for 2,948 yards, 45 touchdowns, and only 2 interceptions, also rushing for 1,338 yards and 17 touchdowns on the ground. During the playoffs, Sellers would have an uncharacteristic breakdown on his offensive lineman. His offensive lineman would not make the block, and Sellers would be slammed to the ground. Sellers pounded the ball on the turf, got up, and started screaming at his lineman. Over on the sideline, Sellers and the South Florence coach, Drew Marlowe, talked about the play, about how he was supposed to cut inside, and about how he was the one at fault. Back in the huddle, Sellers apologized to his lineman. It was the only time in 4 years that LaNorris ever lost his cool, and whenever there was adversity, he would push through it. South Florence would win the 4A state championship, and after he hoisted the title, he returned home and washed the dishes, his father said. As his hometown celebrated the triumph, Sellers silently scrubbed plates, replaying moments in his head before going to his room and watching it on film, trying to figure out how he could get better. He would be named the Florence Morning News Player of the Year and was a state Mr. Football finalist. The Bruins steamrolled their competition that year on their way to an undefeated season. They scored over 40 points in 11 of their 15 games, including the last 9 on the schedule, with an average playoff margin of victory of nearly 35 points. Coming out of high school, according to 24/7 Sports Composite, LaNorris Sellers was a 4-star recruit, who was the 17th best quarterback and 249th best player in the 2023 recruiting cycle. He received over 11 different Division I offers from the likes of Georgia Tech, South Carolina, Syracuse, Virginia, and Virginia Tech. Sellers would fly under the radar for most of his recruiting process due to his injury during his junior season, although he was 6'3" and 235 pounds. He would commit to Virginia in 2021, but when Bronco Mendenhall decided to step away from football, Sellers decided to reopen his recruitment. Partially due to the injury, Sellers' offers dried up as schools moved on. But Syracuse remained, and Sellers quickly committed there in March of 2022. That's when he got bigger, stronger, and more attractive to other schools. During his amazing senior season, he would get an offer from South Carolina, who would put the full court press on him. The Gamecocks consistently sent coaches to check in on him after every game. Sellers wanted to be at South Carolina but didn't want to decommit once again. He took it down to the wire, flipping to South Carolina just before the end of the early signing period. When Sellers enrolled early at South Carolina, there was a lot of excitement surrounding him and high expectations, although he was not the highest rated recruit. Some inside the program believed that Sellers could be the best quarterback in school history when it was all said and done. Spencer Rattler would be the South Carolina starting quarterback last season, and Sellers would not get a ton of playing time throughout the year. But when he did play, he impressed fans. Sellers had just 17 snaps last season, scoring 3 touchdowns in that window, 2 through the air on 4-for-4 of passing against Furman, and 1 on the ground, a long touchdown with multiple broken tackles in the waning moments against Vanderbilt. He became famous for rocking rec specs, and during the games quickly became a fan favorite. Dow Logans focused on developing Sellers last year, which included intense workouts, extra reps after practice, typical backup quarterback things. It also included times tossing Sellers from practice. That was part of the maturation process, Logan said, with a goal to make him an SEC quarterback. He used tough love to prepare Sellers for what life as an SEC quarterback would be like. If he threw a pick in practice, Logans would hound him saying, "Hey, Spencer Rattler just threw the ball 50 times in a game and didn't turn it over once. And you get one throw and you throw a pick?" The coaches raved about how nothing ever fazed him, as he was almost like a robot. Heading into the season, South Carolina did not have a ton of depth at quarterback, so they decided to bring in Auburn transfer Robbie Ashford for the quarterback competition, though it was Sellers' job to lose. He was named the starter in advance of the South Carolina opener against Old Dominion, but his starting debut was a mixed bag. Sellers protected the ball, but his accuracy was shaky. He ended up with just 4.8 yards per attempt. He would bounce back against Kentucky, throwing for 166 yards and 2 touchdowns to only 1 interception, and South Carolina's blowout win, completing 10 of 14 passes. Against LSU, Sellers looked like a star, leading the Gamecocks to a large lead, before getting hurt, leading the Tigers to come back to beat South Carolina. Many believe that if Sellers doesn't get hurt, South Carolina wins that game. In their blowout loss to Ole Miss, Sellers did not look great, but almost led South Carolina to an upset win on the road against Alabama. Sellers would look great to close out the regular season strong, leading South Carolina on a 6-game win streak to end the regular season. He impressed against Missouri, throwing for 353 yards, 5 touchdowns, and only 1 interception, and impressed yesterday against Clemson, including leading them on a game-winning drive where he had an amazing scramble to win the game. He finished the Clemson game with 166 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. After South Carolina's win over Texas A&M, where Sellers had accounted for 350 yards of offense, an SEC assistant coach would text Shane Beamer, "You've got a bleeping Superman playing quarterback back there." Following the Clemson game yesterday, Beamer told the media, "LaNorris Sellers is the best player in the country. And all you media people that vote on the Heisman, if you're not voting for that guy to be in the mix for the Heisman Trophy, you're out of your minds. You know, a player in the country that's done more than that kid has this year." Sellers finished the regular season throwing for 2,274 yards, 17 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions, while also rushing for 655 yards and 7 touchdowns on the ground. He still has 3 years of eligibility left and could be in the Heisman conversation down the road. What do you think? How good is LaNorris Sellers? Let me know in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to check out one of my other videos YouTube thinks you will love right here. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, remember to embrace the grind.